This is a fictional American romance story created using AI for entertainment purposes only, intended strictly for audiences 18 years and older and not suitable for children under 18.
In the fall of 2008, Boston wore anxiety like a second skin. The headlines screamed recession. Coffee shops hummed with whispers about layoffs. Men in tailored suits stared too long into their phones, waiting for emails that would determine their futures. Daniel Whitmore used to walk with confidence down Hawthorne Street, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm, believing in clean lines and modern glass structures. Architecture had always made sense to him. If the foundation was strong, the building would stand. He had believed the same about marriage. The Whitmore house sat at the corner of Hawthorne and Bellamy, a narrow three-story colonial with white shutters and a maple tree that burned crimson every October. It was Vanessa's dream house. She used to stand in the kitchen, barefoot on cool tile, and say, "This is where we'll grow old, Danny." Back then, he believed her. On a Tuesday evening heavy with rain, Daniel sat at the dining table surrounded by unpaid invoices. His latest client, a boutique hotel developer, had filed for bankruptcy. Another contract evaporated overnight. Vanessa stood at the counter, scrolling through her phone. The glow illuminated her face in pale blue. "Any news?" she asked softly. He didn't look up. "They're restructuring. That's what they all say." Silence stretched between them. Vanessa worked for Hale & Mercer Investments, downtown in a high-rise of polished marble and silent elevators. Her boss, Richard Hale, was the kind of man who wore confidence like cologne, sharp, expensive, lingering. Daniel had met him once at a Christmas party. Firm handshake, calculated smile. "You the architect," Richard had said. "Creative field. Brave choice in this economy." Daniel had laughed politely. Now bravery felt indistinguishable from foolishness. The mortgage payment was due in 12 days. That night, Daniel woke at 2:17 a.m. The other side of the bed was empty. He found Vanessa downstairs, sitting at the kitchen island in the dark. "You okay?" he asked. She startled. "Yeah, just couldn't sleep." He poured himself water and leaned against the counter. In the dim light, she looked fragile, like something held together by invisible threads. "We'll figure it out," he said. She nodded, but her eyes said something else, something calculating, afraid. Over the next weeks, small changes emerged. Vanessa began staying late at the office. Quarter-end reports, she explained. Everyone stressed. She started dressing differently, more polished, more precise. New heels appeared in the closet. Daniel noticed but said nothing. He told himself it was ambition, survival. One Friday evening she came home with a bottle of champagne. "Bonus," she said, forcing brightness into her voice. "A bonus?" Daniel blinked. "In this market?" She shrugged. "Performance-based." They drank in the living room. The maple leaves outside trembled in cold wind. Vanessa laughed too loudly at his jokes. Daniel watched her carefully. Later that night, as she showered, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Daniel didn't mean to look. He truly believed he didn't. But the screen lit up with a preview notification. "Richard Hale. We need to be discreet. I'll transfer the rest Monday." Daniel stared at the words. Transfer the rest. His heartbeat slowed in a strange, distant way, like the world had slipped underwater. When Vanessa stepped out of the bathroom, wrapped in a towel, she found him sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone in his hand. "What is this?" he asked quietly. She froze. For a moment she considered lying. He could see it, the flicker of possibility crossing her face. "It's not what you think," she began. "Then tell me what it is." Her shoulders sagged. Something inside her seemed to collapse. "He's helping us," she whispered. "Helping us how?" Silence. The kind that changes everything. Daniel's mind searched for explanations. Consulting fees, overtime pay, a loan. But deep down he already knew. "You didn't," he said, voice barely audible. Tears welled in her eyes. "Danny, we were going to lose the house. So you..." "It was one time," she rushed. "It didn't mean anything. One time." Architecture had taught Daniel that a single crack in a load-bearing wall could bring down an entire structure. He stood slowly. "How much?" he asked. Her lips trembled. "Enough." He let out a hollow laugh. "Enough to put a price on us?" "It was for us," she cried. "For this house. For our future." "Our future?" His voice sharpened for the first time. "You decided that alone." Vanessa stepped toward him. I was scared. So was I. The rain outside intensified, hammering against the windows. In that moment, Daniel realized the betrayal wasn't just physical, it was architectural. She had removed the beam without telling him and expected the ceiling not to fall. He set her phone down gently on the nightstand. I would have sold the house, he said. She shook her head violently. You love this house. I loved you more. The words hung between them, raw, irreversible. For the first time since buying the place, the house on Hawthorne Street felt unfamiliar, as if the walls themselves had shifted. Neither of them slept that night. By morning, something essential had already begun to die. Winter settled over Boston like a verdict. By January, the maple tree outside Hawthorne Street stood bare, its branches skeletal against a sky the color of steel. Inside Hale & Mercer Investments, however, everything gleamed. Glass walls, chrome fixtures, the low hum of controlled climate and controlled ambition. Vanessa Whitmore learned quickly that fear had a scent. It lived in the break-room whispers, in the way assistants lingered too long near closed office doors, in the clipped tone of executives who no longer bothered with pleasantries.
Richard Hale did not smell like fear. He smelled like bergamot cologne and owed money.
Close the door, Vanessa, he said one Thursday evening, not looking up from the city skyline beyond his office window. It was 7:43 p.m. Most of the floor had emptied. She hesitated only a second before doing as he asked. You've been here late every night this week, he continued. Dedication is rare these days. I just want to make sure the quarterly reports are accurate, she replied. He turned then, leaning back in his leather chair. His eyes were observant, not hungry, not yet, but assessing. I admire loyalty, he said, especially in times like this. She swallowed. At home, Daniel had been staring at spreadsheets, running numbers that refused to cooperate. She could still hear his voice from that morning. If you miss another payment, they'll start proceedings. Richard gestured toward the chair across from him. Sit. She did. I'm aware of your situation, he said casually.
Mortgage in Cambridge. Husband in freelance architecture.
The words tightened her spine. Sir? I take care of my people, he said smoothly. But I need to know who's worth taking care of. It wasn't a threat, it was an equation. Over the next few weeks, the conversations became more personal. He asked about her ambitions, about whether she ever felt held back. He mentioned promotions, stability, the kind of bonuses that insulated a person from economic storms. You're too smart to drown with someone else's ship, he said one evening, handing her a folder thicker than necessary. She bristled. Daniel isn't drowning. Richard offered a sympathetic tilt of the head. Of course. But doubt had already planted itself. At night she lay awake beside her husband, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. He looked exhausted even in sleep. The recession had hollowed him out slowly, quietly. She told herself she was being practical. Someone had to be. The first time Richard touched her, it was almost accidental. A hand at the small of her back while guiding her through a crowded restaurant after a client dinner. His palm lingered a fraction too long. She did not step away. Instead, she told herself, this is just proximity. Power feels intimate. The dinner bill alone could have covered their electric bill for a month. You deserve more than survival, Richard said, pouring her another glass of wine. You deserve security. Security. The word echoed in her mind like a hymn. When he suggested transferring her to a special projects role off the books, discretionary bonus structure, she understood the implication without him spelling it out. You'd have my personal support, he said quietly. She stared at the condensation sliding down her glass. At home, Daniel had circled houses for sale online, cheaper neighborhoods, longer commutes. He didn't want to move, but he was preparing himself. She saw the defeat in his posture. It terrified her more than anything. That night, alone in the bathroom, Vanessa examined her reflection. She was 32, still beautiful, still capable of commanding attention. It would be temporary, she reasoned, transactional, controlled. People did worse for less. When Richard invited her to a hotel suite to discuss the transition details privately, she didn't answer immediately. She waited 3 days. On the third day, the bank sent a final notice. The decision did not feel like falling. It felt like stepping carefully off a ledge while convincing herself there was ground below. The hotel suite overlooked the Charles River, lights shimmering like broken glass across black water. Everything inside smelled sterile, expensive. Richard removed his jacket slowly, as if giving her time to reconsider. You don't have to do anything you don't want to, he said. The lie was almost gentle. She stood very still. In her mind, she compartmentalized. This was not about desire. It was not about betrayal. It was about numbers on a page, about preventing foreclosure, about avoiding the humiliation of failure. She thought of Daniel's hands, roughened by drafting pencils and model glue. She thought of the maple tree in October. Then she locked those images away. When Richard kissed her, she kept her eyes open. She did not let herself feel. She calculated. Afterward, she sat at the edge of the bed, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her skirt. Richard moved toward the minibar, casual, victorious. "It will reflect in your account Monday," he said, "and the bonus at quarter end." She nodded once. In the bathroom, she washed her hands longer than necessary. The mirror showed someone composed, almost serene. She told herself, this is a sacrifice, wife sacrifice. On Monday morning, the transfer appeared more money than Daniel had earned in 6 months. He had stared at her in disbelief when she presented it as a performance bonus. She forced a smile. That night, as he wrapped his arms around her in gratitude, whispering, "You saved us," something inside her fractured. Because she had, and she hadn't. The arrangement continued not weekly, not even regularly, but often enough to blur the line between transaction and pattern. Each time she numbed herself further. Each time she promised it was the last. Richard grew bolder, more possessive. A hand on her thigh beneath the conference table. Late-night messages that no longer bothered with euphemism. "Discretion is everything," he would text, but discretion is fragile, and guilt has weight. By the time Daniel saw the message that rainy Friday night, "I'll transfer the rest Monday," Vanessa was already exhausted from holding up 2 collapsing worlds. She had convinced herself she was strong enough to carry the lie. She had not considered what it would cost when it finally cracked. Because the truth about compromises is this: they never stay contained. They seep, they stain, and eventually they demand interest. The rain that night felt endless. It pressed against the windows of the house on Hawthorne Street like a quiet accusation. Inside, the air was too still, too heavy, like the moment before a structure gives way. Daniel Whitmore did not sleep. After Vanessa whispered, "It was one time," something inside him had shifted into a strange mechanical clarity. He sat in the dark living room while she remained upstairs, separated by floors and by something far more permanent. At 3:12 a.m., he opened his laptop. He told himself he wasn't searching for more pain. He was searching for context, for proof that the message he'd seen was misunderstood, that there was a rational explanation he had failed to see. He logged into the joint checking account. The numbers glowed cold and factual on the screen. There it was. 2 deposits over the last 3 months labeled simply RM Consulting. Amounts that were too precise to be random, too large to be accidental. He clicked deeper. The first deposit had come the same week the bank sent their final notice. The second, just days ago. Transfer the rest Monday. His pulse slowed to an unnatural calm. In architecture, Daniel had learned to recognize stress fractures, hairline cracks invisible at first glance, but devastating under pressure. He wondered now how long this crack had been there. How many dinners, how many goodnight kisses, how many whispered reassurances. Upstairs, Vanessa lay awake staring at the ceiling. She knew he was downstairs. She knew what he was likely doing. She did not go to him. She did not know which was worse, that he had discovered it accidentally or that part of her had almost wanted him to. By morning, the house felt altered. Not broken, just unfamiliar, like furniture had been rearranged while they slept. Daniel brewed coffee, 2 mugs out of habit, then paused. Vanessa entered the kitchen slowly. Her face was pale, but composed. "You didn't come to bed," she said. He slid his laptop across the table toward her. "I couldn't," he replied. She saw the screen immediately, the transaction history, the dates. For a long moment, she said nothing. "How many times?" he asked quietly. The question was precise, not hysterical, not loud. That frightened her more than if he had screamed. "I don't know," she said truthfully. "Not like that. It wasn't. Not like what? Not emotional." He exhaled through his nose, almost a laugh. "That's supposed to help?" She sat down slowly across from him. "It was about the house, about us." "No," he said gently. "It was about you deciding what we could survive." The clock above the stove ticked too loudly. "I was scared, Danny," she whispered. "You were losing clients every week. You wouldn't talk about it. You kept saying it would turn around, and you kept sleeping with your boss. The sentence landed without force, no venom, just fact. Silence expanded between them. He studied her face, the familiar curve of her jaw, the small scar near her eyebrow from when they'd fallen off bicycles as teenagers. He remembered building model bridges together in college apartments, cheap wine, big dreams. When did it start? He asked. She hesitated. October, the same month the maple tree had burned red outside their window. Daniel nodded slowly, processing. So when we had Thanksgiving at your sister's, when you toasted to resilience, his voice thinned. You had already? Yes. He closed his eyes briefly. There are moments when shouting would be easier. Anger is kinetic. It gives the body somewhere to put the pain. But Daniel felt none of that. He felt hollow. Did you ever want him? He asked, not looking at her. Vanessa's answer took too long. I wanted security, she said finally. He stood up then, walking toward the living room. She followed a few steps behind, uncertain. Say it, he said, turning to face her. Say what it was. Her lips trembled. It was transactional. The word sounded clinical, sanitized. And what am I? He asked softly. A failing investment? She flinched. That's not fair. No, he agreed, it isn't. The rain softened outside, reduced to a mist. The storm had passed, leaving only debris. I would have sold the house, he repeated from the night before. You would have hated me for it, she said. I might have, he admitted, but I wouldn't have hated myself. The truth of that sentence stunned them both. Vanessa felt something inside her collapse the justification she had been clutching for months. She had told herself she was the strong one, the practical one, the one willing to get her hands dirty. But sitting across from her husband now, she realized she had never truly asked him what he could endure. She had decided for him. You didn't even give me the choice, he said. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but he did not move to wipe them away. Are you still seeing him? He asked. No. He studied her. Will you? No. Another silence. Trust does not explode, it erodes. Daniel walked to the front window. The maple tree stood stripped bare, branches sharp against the clearing sky. When I design something, he said quietly, I account for stress, for weight, for wind. I don't pretend those forces don't exist. He turned back to her. You treated our marriage like it couldn't handle weather. Her breath caught. I thought I was protecting it. You were protecting comfort. The words were not cruel, they were precise. She stepped closer. I love you. He looked at her for a long time. I believe you, he said. And somehow that hurt more than disbelief would have. Because love was not the issue, integrity was. By afternoon, Daniel had packed a small suitcase. Where are you going? She asked, panic creeping into her voice. I need space. For how long? I don't know. He paused at the doorway, glancing back at the house, the staircase they had argued about painting, the dent in the wall from moving furniture, the framed wedding photo above the console table. Structures fail quietly before they fall. He opened the door. Danny, she said, voice breaking. He stopped but did not turn around. I never meant to lose you. He closed his eyes briefly. You already did. The door shut with a soft, final click. Vanessa stood alone in the living room, surrounded by everything she had tried to save. The house was still standing, but the foundation was gone. The divorce papers arrived in early spring. Boston was thawing, but the air still carried the bitterness that clung to skin. Vanessa stood at the kitchen counter on Hawthorne Street, the envelope trembling slightly in her hands. The return address was clinical, efficient, final. Daniel had filed quietly. No dramatic ultimatum, no public spectacle, just a signature at the bottom of a page. She sat down slowly, the house unnervingly silent around her. The maple tree outside had begun to bud again, small green promises pushing through bark that had survived winter. Inside, nothing felt like renewal. Daniel had moved into a short-term rental in Buck Bay the week after the confrontation. A narrow brownstone apartment with exposed brick and a mattress on the floor. Functional, temporary. He told himself that was the point. He threw himself into work with a kind of ruthless discipline that surprised even him. He called old clients. He accepted smaller contracts. He redesigned proposals at 3 in the morning. If his marriage had collapsed because he wasn't strong enough, stable enough, he would never allow himself to be that vulnerable again. At night, though, the quiet swallowed him whole. He would replay conversations in his head, the champagne bottle, the forced laughter, the subtle shifts in Vanessa's wardrobe. How had he not seen it? Or worse, had he seen it and chosen denial because it was easier? The divorce hearing lasted less than an hour. They sat on opposite sides of a polished wooden table, their lawyers speaking in measured tones about assets, property division, shared accounts. Vanessa kept her eyes lowered. Daniel kept his face unreadable. When the judge asked if the dissolution was mutual and voluntary, they both answered yes. The word echoed unnaturally in the sterile room. Afterward, they stood awkwardly in the courthouse hallway. "So this is it," Vanessa said softly. Daniel nodded. He looked thinner, sharper, as if grief had carved him into something harder. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "I know." She searched his face for anger, for longing, anything she could hold on to. Instead, she saw distance. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said politely. Polite, that was worse than rage. "You're leaving Boston?" she asked. "Yes." "Where?" "Seattle." The word landed like a closing door. "When?" "Next month." She felt the ground tilt slightly beneath her. "So you're just starting over?" "I have to." She wanted to say with me. She wanted to beg for reconsideration, but she had spent months convincing herself she was pragmatic, strong, decisive. Now she was the one left behind. Richard Hale did not attend the divorce hearing. He sent flowers instead. White lilies. Expensive. Impersonal. "Proud of your strength," the card read. Vanessa stared at it for a long time before throwing it away. Her special projects role had quietly evolved. The discretionary bonuses continued. So did the late-night texts. But something had shifted. Where once she had felt she was leveraging power, now she sensed the imbalance clearly. Richard no longer spoke in subtle promises. He assumed availability. "You're free now," he said one evening in his office, closing the door behind her. Free. The word felt obscene. She went to the hotel suite again and again, each time feeling less like a strategist and more like collateral. The house on Hawthorne Street remained hers in the settlement. Daniel had insisted. "You fought to keep it," he told his lawyer flatly. "Let her have it." At first she felt victorious. Then the silence set in. Rooms that once held shared laughter now amplified emptiness. The third-floor study still smelled faintly of Daniel's drafting pencils. His old coffee mug remained in the cabinet because she couldn't bring herself to move it. One evening, she walked into the bedroom and stood in the doorway, staring at the bed. Security, she had told herself. This was what security looked like. Polished hardwood floors, mortgage payments covered, a refrigerator full of groceries, and no one to share dinner with. Daniel left Boston on a grey morning in May. He did not ask Vanessa to see him off. He drove along, his car packed with essentials and a few carefully chosen memories. A framed photo of his parents, a sketchbook, a box of old design drafts. As the skyline receded in his rearview mirror, he felt something inside him unravel. He had built his entire adult identity around being Vanessa's husband, around the house, around the future they had planned. Now he was just a man driving west with a fractured heart and a stubborn refusal to collapse. Seattle greeted him with rain. It felt appropriate. He rented a modest apartment overlooking Puget Sound and accepted a position at a mid-sized architecture firm willing to take a chance on someone rebuilding his portfolio. Work became his sanctuary. He designed with precision bordering on obsession. Steel beams accounted for every possible strain. Foundations reinforced beyond requirement. Colleagues admired his discipline. They did not see the reason behind it. Back in Boston, Vanessa began to notice whispers at the office. Hale and Mercer was under quiet investigation. Irregular trades, ethical concerns. Nothing public yet. Richard grew tense, short-tempered. One night, as she adjusted her blouse in the hotel mirror, she caught her own reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. "You're overthinking this," Richard said from the bed. "We both benefit." "Do we?" The thought flickered dangerously. She drove home alone afterward, passing couples walking hand-in-hand along Commonwealth Avenue. Laughter spilling from restaurants. Lives continuing as if betrayal were not a currency traded daily. The house felt cavernous when she entered. She poured herself a glass of wine and sat on the kitchen floor, back against the cabinet, staring at the ceiling. She had saved the house. She had lost the marriage. And now she was losing something else, something harder to name. Respect. For herself. Months passed. Daniel's work in Seattle began gaining recognition. A waterfront development he helped design was featured in a regional architecture magazine. His name printed in clean serif font beneath the headline. He felt nothing when he saw it. Success without someone to share it with felt like applause in an empty theater. Meanwhile, in Boston, the investigation into Halen Mercer grew louder. One afternoon, federal agents entered the building. Richard's office door closed for hours. Vanessa sat at her desk, hands folded, pulse hammering. Security. The word mocked her. That night, she stood alone in the living room of the house on Hawthorne Street, staring at the maple tree swaying under a restless wind. She had clung to material stability as if it were oxygen. Now it felt like a cage. And somewhere across the country, the man she had once promised forever to was learning how to breathe without her. The fall had not been dramatic. It had been gradual, a slow surrender of love for comfort. And comfort, she was beginning to understand, had never loved her back. Seattle did not believe in clean skies. It believed in layers, mist over water, clouds over steel, silence over confession. 7 years after leaving Boston, Daniel Whitmore stood before a wall of glass in his corner office overlooking Elliott Bay. The skyline shimmered in muted gray, ferries cutting slow paths across the sound like deliberate brushstrokes. His name was etched in frosted lettering beside the door. Whitmore Urban Design. He had built it from nothing. After 3 years at the mid-sized firm, he left and took the risk he once feared. Sustainable waterfront housing, smart urban infill, designs that accounted for environmental strain, economic uncertainty, and human fragility. Investors trusted him. Developers sought him. Architecture journals quoted him. He owned a modern townhouse in Queen Anne, now minimalist, structured, immaculate. Steel railings, open spaces, floor-to-ceiling windows, everything intentional, everything reinforced. His assistant once told him, "You design like you're preparing for earthquakes." Daniel had smiled faintly. "I am." He dated occasionally. Polite dinners, intelligent women, controlled emotional exposure. He never stayed long enough for vulnerability to root itself. Love, he had learned, was not the absence of risk. It was the invitation to it. And he no longer extended invitations. That November night, the storm came in without warning. Wind rattled the windows. Rain lashed sideways across the city. Power flickered once before stabilizing. Daniel had just returned from a client dinner. He removed his coat, poured a glass of bourbon, and stood by the window watching the chaos outside. The house felt calm, structured, safe. The doorbell rang. He frowned. No one visited unannounced. It rang again, longer this time. Not impatient, desperate. He set the glass down and walked toward the door. When he opened it, the wind pushed Wayne into the foyer. And there she stood, Vanessa. For a second, his mind rejected the image, as if it were memory made flesh. Her hair was longer now, darker at the roots, her face thinner. The sharp confidence she once carried replaced by something fragile. She wore a coat too light for the storm, soaked through, clinging to a frame. "Hi, Danny." Her voice was smaller. 7 years collapsed into a single heartbeat. He did not move. "You look," she began, then stopped. "You look good." He noticed the tremor in her hands, the absence of jewelry. No wedding ring, no expensive watch. "What are you doing here?" he asked quietly. "I didn't know where else to go." The words carried no manipulation, just exhaustion. Lightning flashed behind her, illuminating the street. For a long moment, he considered closing the door. Instead, he stepped aside. "Come in." She crossed the threshold hesitantly, as if entering sacred ground. The foyer light revealed details the darkness had hidden. Faint lines at the corners of her eyes, fatigue etched deep beneath them. She smelled of rain and travel. "You can leave your coat," he said. She slipped it off slowly. Her sweater underneath was simple, worn. He gestured toward the living room. She walked through the space carefully, taking in the clean lines, the restrained palette. "It's beautiful," she murmured. "It's functional." A faint, sad smile touched her lips. He handed her a towel. She dried her hair awkwardly, aware of his gaze. "Do you want tea?" he asked. "Yes, please." In the kitchen, his movements were steady, controlled. Water boiled, steam rose. His heart did not match his hands. From the doorway, she watched him. "I saw your name in an article," she said, "about the waterfront redevelopment. I've been following your work." He nodded but did not turn around.
That's how you found me?
"Yes." Silence settled, punctuated by rain against glass. He carried 2 mugs to the table. She wrapped her fingers around hers as if absorbing warmth directly into her bones. "What happened?" he asked finally. The question was not accusatory, it was inevitable. She stared into the steam. "Hale and Mercer collapsed 2 years after you left," she said. "Federal investigation, fraud, insider trading." He absorbed that without visible reaction. "Richard was indicted. He made deals, named names. And you?" "I wasn't charged." A bitter pause. "I wasn't important enough." Daniel leaned back in his chair. "You stayed with him?" It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Why?" Her eyes met his, then unshielded. "Because by the time I realized what I'd done, I didn't think I deserved to come back." The honesty startled him. She continued, voice fragile but steady. "He promised stability, promotions, partnership shares. Then, when the investigation started, he distanced himself. Moved assets, protected himself. And you? I was a liability." The wind howled outside, as if echoing the word. "I lost the house," she said softly. His gaze sharpened. The market shifted. Legal fees, frozen accounts. She swallowed. It went into foreclosure. The irony hung heavy between them. She had sacrificed everything for that house. "And now?" he asked. "I've been freelancing, contract work, temp jobs. I moved 3 times this year." She hesitated. "I'm tired, Danny. Not physically, existentially." He studied her face for signs of performance. Old instincts. All he saw was erosion. "Why tonight?" he asked. Her composure cracked slightly. "Because I heard you speak at a sustainability conference in Portland last week." Her voice trembled. "I sat in the back row. You didn't see me." He felt something shift in his chest. "You talked about structural integrity," she continued. "About how buildings fail when small compromises are ignored." His throat tightened. "And I realized," she inhaled shakily, "I was the compromise." The confession did not come with drama, just quiet devastation. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded envelope. "I've written you letters for years," she said. "I never sent them." He did not take it. "What do you want from me, Vanessa?" The question hung raw. She looked up at him fully now. "Forgiveness," she whispered. A beat. And maybe a place to breathe for a little while. There it was. Not reconciliation, not seduction. Shelter. The storm outside intensified, rain streaking across the glass in relentless lines. Daniel stood and walked to the window, hands resting against cool steel framing. He had rebuilt everything from the ground up, every beam reinforced, every boundary deliberate, and now the path stood dripping rainwater onto his hardwood floor. Behind him, Vanessa sat very still, as if afraid that any sudden movement might fracture the fragile possibility in the room. He closed his eyes briefly. 7 years had not erased her. They had simply layered distance over memory. When he turned back, his voice was calm. "You can stay tonight," he said. Her breath left her in a silent exhale. "But this doesn't mean anything else." She nodded quickly. "I understand." Did she? Did he? He led her to the guest room at the far end of the townhouse. Fresh sheets, minimal decor, neutral, safe. At the doorway she paused. "Danny." He stopped but did not step closer. "I never stop loving you." The words landed softer this time, less like a weapon, more like truth stripped of pride. He studied her for a long moment. "I learned how to live without you," he said quietly. She nodded, tears threatening but contained. "I know." He left her there and walked back down the hallway. The storm continued into the night. In separate rooms, under the same roof once more, 2 people who had once shared everything lay awake, older, changed, and uncertain whether time had softened the fracture or simply taught them how to live around it. Morning would demand clarity, but for now the past had returned, and neither of them knew if the foundation could bear its weight. The storm did not pass. By midnight, the wind had grown territorial, rattling the steel railings outside Daniel's townhouse like it was testing their resolve. Rain streaked the glass in relentless diagonals. Somewhere in the distance, a transformer blew with a hollow pop, plunging a block into darkness. Inside, the lights remained on. Daniel sat at the kitchen island, untouched bourbon in front of him, laptop closed. He had not attempted sleep. He doubted she had either. Footsteps approached softly down the hallway. Vanessa appeared at the edge of the room, wearing one of the spare t-shirts he'd left folded in the guest room drawer. It hung loosely on her, unfamiliar and intimate at once. "I can't sleep," she said. "I didn't expect you to." He gestured to the stool across from him. She sat. For a moment, neither spoke. The refrigerator hummed quietly. The house felt suspended between past and present. "You said you wanted forgiveness," Daniel began evenly. "Forgiveness requires truth." She nodded. "You deserve it." He watched her carefully, not like a husband now, but like a man assessing structural damage. "Start from the beginning," he said. She exhaled slowly. "When the recession hit, everyone at the firm was panicking," she began. "Assistants were getting laid off, analysts crying in bathrooms. Richard would call me into his office just to talk. About work? At first." Her fingers twisted together on the counter. "He knew about our mortgage because I'd mentioned it casually months before. When the final notice came, I must have looked different. Desperate." She swallowed. He noticed. Daniel's jaw tightened. "He never forced me," she continued quickly. "Not physically." "But," Daniel pressed, "but he made it clear that stability came with loyalty. Personal loyalty." Lightning flashed, illuminating her face. "I told myself I was in control," she said, "that I was choosing it. But he'd say things like, 'You don't want to be one of the ones we let go,' or 'I protect people who are close to me.'" Daniel's voice remained calm. "That's coercion." She flinched slightly. "I didn't want to see it that way." "Why not?" "Because if I admitted I was being manipulated," her voice wavered, "then I wasn't sacrificing. I was surrendering." Silence settled. Daniel stood and walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "You could have told me," he said. "I know. You could have said you were scared." "I didn't know how," her voice cracked. "You were already carrying so much. Every time you came home with that look on your face like you'd swallowed glass, I felt like I had to be stronger." He turned toward her. "Stronger doesn't mean secret." She nodded, tears slipping free. "I felt if I fixed the money problem, everything else would fall back into place. And when it didn't, I kept going." Her shoulders trembled, because stopping would mean admitting it was wrong. Daniel leaned against the counter across from her. "How many times?" he asked quietly. She closed her eyes. 8. The number hung heavy in the air. 8 choices, 8 crossings of a line. "Did you ever think about leaving me for him?" he asked. "No. Immediate. Firm. Never." "Why?" "Because I didn't love him." She met his gaze steadily. "I loved you. I just didn't respect what we were going through." The distinction cut deeper than he expected. "You didn't respect me," he said. Her breath hitched. "I didn't respect your fear," she corrected softly. "All mine." The honesty stunned them both. Outside, the wind shifted direction. "I hated watching you doubt yourself," she continued. "You were brilliant, Danny, but the world didn't reward brilliance that year, and I panicked. I thought if I didn't act, we'd both drown." "So you decided to drown alone," he replied. She shook her head. "I thought I could carry it." "And how did that work out?" A fragile, humorless laugh escaped her. "I lost everything." He studied her face again, searching for defensiveness, for excuses. There were none left. "When the investigation started," she said, voice quieter now, "Richard stopped pretending. He'd snap at me, remind me I was replaceable. One night he told me, 'You are useful when I needed loyalty. Don't confuse that with value.'" Daniel's hands curled slightly at his sides. "And that's when I understood," she whispered. "I had traded my marriage for the illusion of control." The words seemed to drain her. He walked back to the island and sat opposite her. "Why didn't you come to me then?" he asked. She hesitated. "Because by then, you were thriving." His brow furrowed. "I followed your career quietly," she admitted. "When you left the firm in Seattle to start your own practice, I saw the announcement. When your first project won an award, I clipped the article. You kept track of me." "Yes. Why?" Her eyes filled again. "Because you were the only real thing I ever built." The sentence landed with devastating softness. Daniel looked away first. He had imagined this conversation many times over the years. Imagined shouting, imagined cold dismissal. Instead, what he felt now was more complicated. Anger had calcified into something quieter, but beneath it, buried carefully, was still love. He hated that. I spent years thinking I wasn't enough, he admitted suddenly. She looked up, startled. I thought if I'd made more money, if I'd been stronger, you wouldn't have done it. Her face crumpled. No, that's what betrayal does, he continued. It rewrites your identity. She reached across the counter instinctively, then stopped herself mid-motion.
I never wanted you to feel small, she whispered.
I did, he said simply. The honesty hung between them like exposed wiring. I built everything here to be unbreakable, he said, gesturing vaguely around the house. Steel beams, reinforced joints, contracts airtight. And your heart? She asked carefully. He gave a faint, humorless smile. Load-bearing walls. A long pause followed. Do you still love me? She asked, voice barely audible. He did not answer immediately. Because love was not absent. It was complicated. Yes, he said finally. The words seemed to shake her. But love isn't trust, he added. She nodded slowly. I don't expect you to forget, she said. I don't even expect you to take me back. Then why come? Because I was tired of carrying the shame alone. He studied her in the dim light. You think staying here fixes that? No, she shook her head. But facing you does. The storm outside began to soften, rain shifting to a steady rhythm instead of violence.
They sat there for hours, peeling back layers, small details he hadn't known, fields she hadn't named, insecurities he'd buried. By 3 in the morning, exhaustion replaced tension. Vanessa stood slowly. I should try to sleep, she murmured. He nodded. At the hallway entrance, she turned. I'm not asking you to save me, she said. I just wanted you to see the whole truth. He held her gaze. I do, he replied. She disappeared into the guest room. Daniel remained at the island, staring at the faint reflection of himself in the dark window. He loved her. That was undeniable. But love had once coexisted with humiliation, with doubt, with nights questioning his worth. Forgiveness was not forgetting, and reconciliation was not the same as healing. Upstairs, Vanessa lay awake again, but lighter somehow. The truth had finally been spoken without armor. The storm outside dwindled to mist. Inside the house, 2 hearts beat in uncertain rhythm, no longer strangers, but no longer safe. Morning would come, and with it, a choice neither of them could postpone. Morning in Seattle arrived quietly, almost apologetically. The storm had passed, leaving the city rinsed and reflective. Water clung to rooftops and railings, sunlight filtering through thinning clouds like a cautious forgiveness. Daniel was already awake when Vanessa stepped into the kitchen. He stood by the espresso machine, sleeves rolled to his forearms, posture composed. The discipline was back in place, the emotional exposure of the night before folded neatly behind his eyes. Morning, she said softly. Morning. He handed her a cup without asking how she took it. They sat across from each other again, daylight now exposing what darkness had softened: fatigue, age, reality. I need to show you something, Daniel said. She stiffened slightly. He slid his tablet across the table. An article filled the screen. Federal charges, asset seizures. A familiar name bolded in the headline. Richard Hale sentenced to 12 years in federal prison for securities fraud and witness tampering. Vanessa's breath caught, not because she didn't know, but because seeing it here, in Daniel's house, felt like the final layer of exposure. You've been following it, she said quietly. Yes. He watched her closely. The trial was public, he continued. Testimonies, financial records, internal emails. Her hands tightened around the mug. They released portions of the case files last year, Daniela did. There were communications between him and other executives. He tapped the screen. One paragraph highlighted. Keep her close. She's loyal when she thinks she's chosen. Vanessa's face drained of color. I didn't see that, she whispered. No, Daniela said evenly. You wouldn't have. She stared at the words as if they might rearrange themselves into something kinder. She wasn't empowered, Daniel continued, his voice controlled, but edged. She was leveraged. Vanessa swallowed hard. I know, she said. I figured it out too late. He leaned back slightly. Did you ever think, he asked carefully, That he chose you because he knew you were desperate? Tears welled again, but she did not look away this time. Yes, the admission was steady, brutal. Daniel exhaled slowly. For years, he said, I imagined him as something larger than me, wealthier, smarter, more powerful. I thought you left our integrity for a better option. She shook her head immediately. There was never a better option, she said. There was just fear. He studied her in the daylight, the absence of pretense clearer now. I testified, she added quietly. His eyes narrowed slightly. At the trial? Yes, he hadn't known that. I wasn't subpoenaed at first, she continued, but when the investigation widened, they reached out. I had emails, calendar records, hotel invoices. She swallowed. I gave them everything. Why? Because I was tired of being complicit. The word hung between them. Complicit. In fraud, in betrayal, in her own self-destruction. He tried to discredit me, she continued. Said I was vindictive, that I'd misinterpreted our arrangement. Daniel's jaw tightened again. What did you say? He asked. I said I made my own choices. Her voice was calm now. No one forced me into his bed, but he cultivated the environment, the pressure, the illusion that survival required surrender. Silence followed. Outside, a ferry horn sounded low across the water. You know what the worst part is? She said after a moment. Daniel waited. For years I told myself I'd been strategic, that I'd played the game. She gave a small, broken laugh. But I wasn't a player. I was a pawn. The word settled heavily. Daniel felt something unexpected stir, not vindication, not satisfaction, grief. Because the narrative he'd carried all these years, the powerful boss stealing his wife through dominance and superiority, had given his pain a shape. This version was more complicated, more human. You were used, he said. Yes. And you used me, he replied quietly. The air shifted again. She nodded. Yes. There it was. No deflection. No bargaining. I don't get to erase what I did just because he was worse, she added. Betrayal doesn't shrink because the other person was corrupt. He looked at her for a long time. That's the first thing you've said since arriving that makes me believe you've changed, he admitted. She accepted that without protest. He stood and walked toward the window again, habit returning when emotion swelled. For years, he said, I hated him. I know. I imagined confronting him, proving I was better, more successful. You are, she said quietly. He shook his head slightly. That's not the point. He turned to face her. The point is, I built my identity in opposition to a man who was rotting from the inside. The realization unsettled him. I let him define me, Daniel said. Vanessa watched him with a new kind of sadness. He doesn't get that anymore, she said softly. He studied her words. Across the table sat the woman who had once dismantled his confidence. The woman he had loved through youth and ambition and failure. She looked smaller now, not diminished, but stripped of illusion. Do you want me back because you lost everything? He asked suddenly. The question was sharp. She inhaled carefully before answering. No. He waited. I wanted you back even when I still had the house, she said. Even when I still had the salary. I just didn't think I deserved to knock on your door. Why now? Because I finally stopped confusing shame with punishment. Her gaze held steady. Punishing myself didn't bring you back, it just kept me stuck. He absorbed that. And if I say no, he asked. Her voice did not tremble this time. Then I'll accept it. No desperation, no manipulation, just truth. The twist Daniel hadn't anticipated wasn't that Richard Hale had fallen. It was that the story he told himself for 7 years that he had been replaced by someone stronger had been false. Vanessa hadn't traded up, she had traded down, into fear, into illusion, into someone who saw her not as a partner, but as leverage. Yet none of that rewrote the night she chose. None of it rebuilt the foundation she had cracked. Daniel returned to the table and sat down. You were used, he said again, quieter now. But you also used me to justify it. Yes. And I was broken, he continued. But I also used that brokenness to build walls so high no one could reach me. She gave a faint, sad nod. So where does that leave us? She asked. The question hovered, fragile. Daniel looked around his meticulously designed kitchen. Clean lines, reinforced structure, intentional emptiness. Then he looked back at her. Knowing the truth doesn't undo the damage, he said, but it changes the story. Outside, sunlight finally broke fully through the clouds, casting silver light across the water. Inside, two people sat facing each other, not as villain and victim, not as savior and failure, but as flawed adults who had both survived their own worst decisions. The empire had collapsed, the illusion had shattered. What remained was simpler and harder. Love, wounded pride, and a choice neither of them could avoid much longer. Morning settled fully over Seattle, clear and startlingly bright. The storm had scrubbed the sky raw, leaving behind a fragile blue that felt almost undeserved. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of Daniel's townhouse, illuminating every deliberate line, every polished surface. Nothing here was accidental. Vanessa stood near the window, watching ferries glide across Elliott Bay. The city looked composed, purposeful, nothing like the chaos of the night before. Behind her, Daniel moved quietly through the kitchen, rinsing cups, restoring order. Neither of them had spoken for nearly 20 minutes. It was not avoidance, it was recognition. Some decisions required silence before language. Finally, he dried his hands and turned to her. "You should stay for breakfast," he said. She nodded. "Okay." They sat across from each other once more, plates mostly untouched. The air no longer trembled with confession. It felt steadier now, like the aftermath of surgery when the bleeding has stopped but the scar is inevitable. "I've been thinking," Daniel began. She didn't interrupt. "For 7 years, I believed forgiving you meant pretending it didn't happen, or letting you back into my life exactly as before." He paused. "I couldn't do that." "I know," she said softly. "But last night," he studied her face carefully. "I realized forgiveness doesn't require restoration." She absorbed that slowly. "It can mean release," he continued. "Release from resentment, from the version of you I carried in my head." She nodded, tears gathering but not falling. "And what about us?" she asked carefully. Daniel leaned back slightly, folding his hands. "I still love you," he said. The words were steady now, not explosive, not desperate, just truth. Her breath caught anyway. "But love," he added, "isn't the only structure that matters." She closed her eyes briefly, bracing. "I built this life carefully," he said, gesturing around the room. "Not because I stopped loving you, but because I needed to know who I was without you." She opened her eyes again. "And who are you?" she asked. "A man who survived losing everything he thought defined him." He held her gaze. "A man who doesn't want to live in fear of being dismantled again." She nodded. "I don't want to dismantle you," she whispered. "I know," he softened slightly. "But trust isn't rebuilt by intention. It's rebuilt by time, by proof, by consistency." Silence settled gently between them. "I'm not asking to move in," she said quickly, "or to rewind. I know, I just..." She inhaled shakily. "I wanted a chance to stand in front of you and not hide." "You did that," he said. They sat with that. The morning light shifted, casting long lines across the hardwood floor. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said. "Yes." "If the recession had never happened, if we'd never struggled financially, do you think you still would have done it?" She considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "But not because I'm above temptation, because I wouldn't have been that afraid." He appreciated the honesty. "Fear doesn't excuse betrayal," he said. "No," she agreed, "but understanding it keeps me from becoming that person again." Another quiet pause. Daniel stood and walked to a small shelf near the living room wall. From it, he pulled a thin sketchbook, one he had brought from Boston years ago. He handed it to her. Inside were early drawings of the Houghton Street house, renovation ideas, garden plans, notes in both their handwriting. She ran her fingers over the faded ink. "I kept it," he said, "not because I wanted the house back, but because it reminded me of who we were before everything got transactional." Her eyes filled. "I love that version of us," she whispered. "So did I." He took the sketchbook gently from her hands and returned it to the shelf. "But we're not them anymore." The statement wasn't cruel. It was factual. Vanessa stood slowly. "So this is goodbye," she said, not as a question, but as recognition. Daniel stepped closer, not touching yet. "It's not exile," he said. "It's boundary." She swallowed. "I forgive you," he said quietly. The words seemed to alter the air itself. She let out a sound somewhere between a sob and relief. "But I can't rebuild a marriage," he continued. "Not now. Maybe not ever." She nodded, tears finally slipping free. "I understand. I don't want you punished," he added.
And I don't want to punish myself by reopening something I'm not ready to carry. She took a shaky breath. You choosing yourself, she said softly. Yes. There was no bitterness in her voice, only acceptance. She stepped forward then, tentative, giving him room to pull away if he chose. He didn't. They embraced carefully, like handling something fragile but real. No desperation, no clinging, just acknowledgement. I am proud of who you became, she whispered against his shoulder. I am proud of who you're trying to become, he replied. They separated slowly. Outside, the city moved on, cars passing, ferries docking, people beginning ordinary days. Vanessa retrieved her coat from the hallway. Where will you go? He asked. I have a friend in Tacoma, she said, short term. He nodded. And after that? She managed a faint smile. I'll build something honest. He opened the front door. Cool morning air rushed in, carrying the clean scent left behind by rain. She paused on the threshold. Loving you was never the mistake, she said quietly. No, he agreed. Losing ourselves was. She stepped outside. For a moment she stood there, sunlight touching her face, older and marked by consequence, but no longer hiding. Then she walked down the path and into the brightness of the morning. Daniel remained at the doorway until she disappeared around the corner. He did not feel triumphant. He did not feel shattered. He felt something steadier. Forgiveness had not restored what they lost. It had released him from carrying it. He closed the door gently and stood in the quiet house, the life he had constructed, the boundaries he had chosen. Love still existed, but it no longer owned him. And somewhere beyond the city skyline, beyond past mistakes and collapsed empires, two people who once broke each other would go on separately, stronger, not because they reunited, but because they finally understood what it meant to let go.